Just part of President Donald Trump's speech there. Well, let's speak to France 24's Washington correspondent, Fraser Jackson, who was listening in on that speech for us. Fraser, he started with that bold statement, America is back. This speech was always going to be about Trump ushering in what he believes essentially is the US's redemption, wasn't it?
Yeah, and like many things with Donald Trump, it was record-breaking. The previous longest speech, this type of speech to Congress, was in 2019, a record set by Trump himself. That at the time was 1 hour, 22 minutes and 25 seconds. While Donald Trump smashed past that with this speech, 1 hour 40 minutes. He was talking before Congress there, and he started that speech by saying that America is back. There was some pushback from the Democrats. It wasn't really long until the opposition started. Trump started by talking about how big his victory is, at which point Al Green, the representative from Houston, Texas, stood up and shouted that he doesn't have a mandate to tear down Medicaid, a government-assisted healthcare program, at which point Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, ordered a point of decorum and had the Sergeant-at-Arms escort him from the chamber. Al Green then spoke to some of my colleagues from the White House press corps who were holding just outside of the room, and he said, quote, "It's worth it to let people know that there are some people who are going to stand up to Trump." That's what Green said to my colleagues at the White House press corps. Donald Trump then said that he didn't know whether he faced Al Green said that he didn't know whether he was facing any formal punishment yet for being ejected from the House chamber. He'll probably know that over the course of the next day or so. But getting back to Trump's speech itself, he said, "It's our presidency." Many said it's the most successful in history of the United States, which the Democrats laughed. Some of them held up paddles that they had in the audience saying false. Some Democrats shouted, "You're lying," as well. Donald Trump then addressed the Democrats, saying, "I look at the Democrats in front of me and I realize there's absolutely nothing I can say to make them happy or to make them smile." He said it shouldn't be this way, addressing some of the partisanship there in the United States. Some would argue he's been a big reason for that partisanship over the course of the last decade or so. Donald Trump then said he's ended the weaponized government, whereas an example, a sitting president is allowed to viciously prosecute his political opponents like me. And then he said, "How'd that work out?" which got a big round of applause and a smile from J.D. Vance, who was sat behind him. He mentioned DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which has been slashing the federal workers here in D.C. And around the rest of the United States, as well as the government budgets. Elon Musk stood up and got a round of applause from Republicans there. Democrats looking very stony-faced while Elon Musk was stood there. All in all, though, there wasn't really much news that came out of the speech. He spoke a little bit about the tariffs, of course, the 25% tariffs that are now in effect on Canada and Mexico, and the additional 10% on China. He did say there'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much, talking about the impact on those tariffs on the American consumer. But some Democrats had had enough by the end of the speech and walked out of it, including Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont as well. There was a significant chunk of foreign policy at the end, which most international viewers will be most listening out for. He talked about the Panama Canal, once again saying he was going to take over the Panama Canal. He said good luck to Marco Rubio to do that, the Secretary of State. He also said a bit of a pointed line, really, at Marco Rubio, saying, "Now we know who to blame if anything goes wrong." It was a joking line, but given some of the headlines that we've seen about Trump and Marco Rubio's relationship, that could be taken the wrong way by some. An interesting line also on Greenland. Of course, he's threatened to make Greenland part of the United States. Well, he had a very pointed line for Greenland and as well, saying one way or the other, we're going to get it. Now, Ukraine is what we were focused on most closely here. We were expecting, according to Reuters, that there would be an announcement of a deal that's been signed between Ukraine and the US. That did not materialize, but Donald Trump did say that he'd received a letter from Volodymyr Zelensky just before the speech. I'll read out what that letter from Zelensky said. It said, "Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. The letter continues, nobody wants peace more than the Ukrainians. My team and I stand ready to work under President Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts. We really do value how much America has done to help Ukraine maintain its sovereignty and independence regarding the agreement on minerals and security. Ukraine is ready to sign at any time that is convenient for you. Donald Trump saying that he appreciated that Zelensky sent him that letter. So we're now wondering whether we're seeing the end of that spat that we saw at the Oval Office on Friday. Of course, Zelensky taking a much softer tack there towards the American president. And he ended by talking about the assassination attempt on his life in Butler, Pennsylvania. He said, I believe that my life was saved that day in Butler for a very good reason. He said, I was saved by God to make America great again. I believe that. And then wrapped with a much more kind of rousing speech about American spirit and the American possibilities, American dreams, a much more kind of traditional end to the speech there. So a wide-ranging speech that touched on a lot of different aspects, got a lot of pushback, and we'll be expecting to see that pushback upon by the Democrats when they release their rebuttal shortly.
Yeah, we'll definitely be following for that. Great to get that overview there. Fraser, you really did just give us very nice detail on a lot of the things that he spoke about. I do want to focus in on some of the announcements he made. He did talk about tariffs and imposing reciprocal tariffs. Tell us what had to say about that.
Yeah, the tariffs really are interesting because they've already come into effect, the tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and the 25%, which is now being felt by the Canadians, is going to be basically reintroduced on the other side of the border as well. Donald Trump said the most key thing really that he said was about the farmers that he was talking about. Now, if you cast your minds back to the first term of Donald Trump, he had a trade war with China and the farmers of America were basically caught in the middle of that because once again, tariffs tend to not be picked up by the country that's exporting to the United States, but rather the end consumer within the United States who ends up buying the product with an increased value to try to absorb that tariff on the distributor's end. So to counterbalance some of the massive amounts of tariffs that were put on China in the first administration, there was about $90 billion that was recouped from China in that first administration, but over $60 billion in assistance went to farmers who were impacted by those tariffs, who had lost revenue because of those tariffs. So they were not as lucrative as the Trump administration thought they would be, and a lot of those tariffs ended up going out. In fact, they ended up costing more than some of the nuclear weapons programs and upkeep than in the 2018, 2019, and 2020. So Donald Trump kind of hinted towards that in this speech. He said that there will be some disturbance when it comes to tariffs, and that really was an interesting point because he's only really mentioned that a couple of times in the Oval Office. Normally he says that there's not going to be any impact and it's going to be China and Mexico and Canada who feel the impact of these tariffs, but he has started to temper that somewhat in the last couple of weeks, saying that there is a possibility that some people will feel the impacts of those tariffs here in the United States. But he says, he loves his farmers and that it's only going to be a short-term disturbance and they're okay to shoulder that disturbance for a short while. Whether the farmers themselves of America actually believe that is harder to say. And of course, a lot of the farmers in America weren't just exporting to China and Canada and to Mexico as well. Some of them were exporting to the federal government. I was thinking especially about soy farmers here in America, who a lot of their soybean production was sold to the federal government, to USAID, who then shipped that as foreign aid elsewhere in the world, in Africa and elsewhere. So the fact that USAID has been shut down and those federal contracts are no longer running as well is also going to impact the farmers of America. So then we may see some more kind of bailouts of the farmers that we saw in the first term, again with Donald Trump's second term this time around.
And Fraser, I just want to, for the final question, just touch on another thing that Trump said. He declared war on wokeness. He's done that on, a number of occasions. Let's take a listen to what he had to say on wokeness.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion policies all across the entire federal government and indeed the private sector and our military. And our country will be woke no longer.
Just briefly, Fraser, just talk to us a little bit about, this war that Trump has declared on wokeness in the US.
Well, of course, one of the things that Donald Trump really receives most warmly from his supporters is this woke ideology, the fight against what he calls the woke mind virus, these kind of social issues that Donald Trump likes to push back upon. And that's why we're seeing a lot of the cancellation of these DEI policies, the transgender ban in sports and things like that, or a lot of kind of social issues that Donald Trump believes are actually very important for his base and really rile his base up and really get people out to the polls. So he's going to keep pushing those kind of things as much as he can, because for his base and for the people who vote for him, they test very well. And the transgender ad that he ran during the campaign also tested very well as well. So Donald Trump will not be stopping those kind of initiatives anytime soon. But of course, there's other substantive policy issues as well, which will have a more tangible impact, should we say, on people's lives.